Okay, we are in section 8.5. We're talking about factoring x squared plus bx plus c. Okay, so I'm just going to do an example first, and I want everybody to watch this. In here, we have a trinomial. Okay, so our trinomial, we have three terms. We have one that has a coefficient that's called A, one that has a coefficient called B, and one has a coefficient called C. If you look here, the A value would be 1, the B value is 5, and the C value is 4. So one of the things that we're going to do is we're always going to start out by looking at C, the last value, and we're going to figure out all the ways it can multiply to get that value. So you may want a calculator. You know, I would suggest that you get one right now, and it'll make it a lot easier. And some, like this one, you probably won't need a calculator. But I'm going to go through, how I generally teach this. So if we look at this one is the value 4. So what we're looking for all the numbers that we could multiply to get 4. So the way I've always taught it for students to make it simple is we just start with the number 1. And I'm going to divide by 1. And why? What this means is when I divided by 1, I got 4. That means the 1 that I divided by times 4 would get me back to the original 4, right? So I'm going to write this down underneath here. And to get 4, one of the ways I can do it is 1 times 4. And then I tell students, you just continue to increase the numbers. I'm going to divide by 2, and I get 2. Now, at this point, you can stop because you've seen one of the numbers you already used. We already used 2, and I always say it's like a little U pattern. We completed this because if I were to keep going up with the number like this and say, well, what about 4 divided by 3? Now, I'm going to put a dot on it. When I divided by 3, I got a number that's smaller, right? If you get a number that's smaller, you for sure can stop. But I'm not going to do 4 divided by 4 because that would mean 4 times 1. I already have 4 times 1. I don't need one that repeats. So I stop once it kind of turns the pattern around, if that makes sense. These are all the numbers. Now, these two numbers have to multiply. They always multiply to get C. Always. We're learning what is called factoring. And I'm going to go through it really slow today. So this lesson might be a little bit longer, but we should get done, within a half hour, I think. But they got to multiply to get 4. But then they have to add up to get 5 when I multiply back through. So what we're trying to do in this problem is we're trying to come up with a binomial. We just got done multiplying a bunch of these binomials, how we distribute it throughout. But we're trying to undo it now. It's called factoring. To get x squared, I would take x times x. And you know how in these last problems we kept saying, well, x times x is x squared, right? But now the last two terms have to multiply to get 4. Well, if I were to put a 2 here and a 2 here, 2 times 2 will get me 4. We've established that. And if I make them both positive, I'm going to look at what that would get. When I take the x times the x, that's x squared. But when I take this x times 2, that gets me a plus 2x. And this 2 times that gets me a plus 2x. And then I have to look, do those two, when I combine them, get me the 5x? So I haven't factored it correctly. I haven't broken it down correctly. So that tells me 2 times 2 would not work. So I'm going to take the 2 out and the 2 out there. And I'm going to replace it with the 1 and the 4. Now, x times x is still x squared. 1 times 4 is still 4. But what I'm really worried about is these 2 in the bottom. And I kind of make it look like a smiley face and a nose. There's the nose in the middle, and that's the smiley face. When you check the smiley face and the nose, those 2 always have to add up to this one. X times 4 is a positive 4x, and 1 times x is a positive 1x. Those 2 add up to 5, so I factored this one correctly. So what's my answer? My answer is x plus 1 times x plus 4. That's the factored value of this, and that's what we're learning today. So hopefully already that's making a little bit of sense, but we have 8 problems that we're going to look at in the homework here, or not the homework, in the lesson. Okay, ready to see number example 1, part A. So in A it says factor x squared plus 11x plus 24. First of all, to get x squared, I would take x times x. That makes sense. This is my C value. So I want to come up with all the ways to come up with 24. And first of all, if you start out and you say, well, I know 1 times 24 would get me 24. Then you take your calculator and you take 24 divided by 2. So on your calculator, take 24 divided by 2. What does that give you? 12. Now let's keep going up. Take 24 divided by 3 on your calculator. And you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Okay? 24 divided by 1. 1 times 24. 24 divided by 2. 2 times 12. 24 divided by 3. 3 times 8. 24 divided by 4. 4 times 6. 24 divided by 5 gets me a number that's smaller. I can stop. Okay? So I'm going to write them all down. So I'm going to write down 3 times 8, and I'm going to write down 4 times 6. Okay? Now, there's another part I'm going to teach you in this. All of these multiplied by 20 to 24. So no matter what, if I were to put 1 and 24 here, that would get me 24. 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6. All of them work. But they can't just do that. I also have to check what happens when I multiply this times this and this times this. If I do that, this one is going to get me 24x. And this one's going to get me 1x. And there's no way 24 and 1 are going to help me get 11. So I'm going to give you another clue as to what to look for. It's kind of like reading backwards. They multiply to 24. That's why I come up with all these values down here. I've already kind of determined 1 and 24 is not going to be a good one. But the next thing you look for is now read it backwards. I start with the 24. Now I look at the sign. That sign tells me they're going to have to add together to get something. Okay? So get how I'm saying read backwards? It's 24. Now I see the plus sign, but I'm going from right to left. Are you kind of following what I'm talking about? So as I'm reading this way. So they have to add together to get what? They have to add to get a positive 11. Do you see two numbers that could add to 11 down there? 3 and 8. So if I make it positive 3 and positive 8, would those add up to positive 11? Oh, now let's check. Now, I believe that's the answer. And if you understand it well, then you have the answer. The way I'm going to check is I'm going to multiply it out. X times x is x squared. X times 8 is plus 8x. 3 times x is plus 3x. Those indeed will add to 11x. They'll be positive. 3 times 8 is 24. That's why we start with that. That is the right answer. It's now factored correctly. You do not have to multiply it back. That is what we want. We want to undo it. We spent all this time before multiplying them, right? Now we're undoing it, and that's called factoring. Is that making some sense? Okay. So, next one. X times x gets us x squared. What do the last two numbers have to multiply to be? What do they have to multiply to be? The last two. They have to be what? What do these two here and here have to multiply? When I multiply them, we have to get what? 12. 12. You always look at the last number. Last time we looked at the 24, so now we're looking at 12. So we come up with all the ways to get 12. So I'm going to write it down, and this is why I teach it this way, because it really makes it pretty easy. Other teachers teach a different way, and maybe you took another class and they taught this box method. I just teach kind of the old school method of why it works the way it works. And if you understand this, it'll help a lot. And there are different methods you can learn. But 12, how do I multiply to get 12? 1 times 12. Okay, now when we hit 4 times 3, don't put that one down, because when you divide by 4, it gets you a number smaller, and we have it already. And that's why I call it kind of looping around. Once we start to repeat the numbers, we don't put 4 and 3 because it's already in the list. So once we get to a number where it isn't, where it would repeat or it gets smaller, we stop. We have them all, right? All we want to do is come up with all the possibilities. Now, reading backwards, they multiply to 12, but they have to add up to positive 8. Which two add up to 8? 2 and 6. And to make positive 8, positive 2 and positive 6. Making a little more sense? Okay. Now, we could check, but if I multiply, I always just call these two, it's the middle loops. Those are the ones you got to check, because see, x times x is x squared. 2 times 6 is 12. We have the first and last, but we're checking the last ones. This would be 6x, positive 6, and positive 2x, and that indeed gets us 8. If we did it right, we don't even have to check, because we understand that already. All right, the next one. Now we're going to get a little trickier, because now, notice, the first two, everything was positive, right? Everything was positive. This one, in the middle, it's got a negative. We're not going to let it bother us, so we're still going to get this one done. X times x. And now we have to get 35. So if you take your calculator, of course, 1 goes into anything. So the first one you can always write down. This is why you want that calculator. 35 divided by 1. We're going to write down 1 times 35. 35 divided by 2 doesn't work. 35 divided by 3 doesn't work. 35 divided by 4 doesn't work. 35 divided by 5 works. So we're going to write down 5 and 7. 35 divided by 6, is that smaller than the number we divided by? Stop. Okay? So there's only 2 possibilities. 1 times 35 and 5 times 7. Now here's what it tells us they have to do. Remember, we learn to read this backwards as we work through. They multiply by 35, but they add up. Now, why do they add? There's a plus sign. I'm reading from left to right. They add up to negative 36. So, these two would add up to 12, right? Would these two add up to 36? Yes, but they have to be negative 36. So that means they both have to be negative. So if we go minus 1 and minus 35, now that's going to be negative 36. And you say, well, how does that work? First of all, negative 1 times negative 35. A negative times a negative is a positive 35. But this is minus 35x, and this is minus 1x. That gets me the negative 36. They will add up to be negative 36. Okay? Kind of getting what I'm talking about with reading it backwards a little bit? All right, the next one. See if you can do it. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to try it. X, they got to be 8. 1 times 8, 2 times 4, that's it, right? They have to, as we read backwards, they have to add up to what? Negative 6. So which ones they got to be? 2 and 4, and if they're adding to a negative, they both have to be negative. So minus 2, minus 4. Because a negative 2 times a negative 4 is a positive 8. And if we multiply those, I call them the smile and the nose, we get negative 4x minus 2x. That's negative 6x. Okay. All right. Now, if you notice, this one has something different. It has a minus at the end, the minus 18. That's going to change some things. So work through this one together. X and x is still x squared. They still have to multiply to 18. So we're going to start there. 1 times 18 times 9. 3 times, and that's it. Now, remember to read backwards. These, they multiply to 18. But if you look at this, they now have to subtract. And when you subtract them, you get a negative 3. So first of all, which two are 3 away from each other if you subtract them? 3 and 6. So it's got to be 3 and 6. Okay, but we have to subtract them and get a negative 3. So if I were to make the 6 positive and the 3 negative, that would be a positive 3, right? We want a negative 3. So one thing, when this is a negative, there will always be one positive and one negative, and you got to figure out which. Well, since the middle's negative, I'm going to go positive 3 and negative 6, because a negative 6x plus 3x, those subtract because they're different, and they get me a negative 3 because there's more negatives than positives. So when there's a negative, you got to think a little bit more, but you got to know, okay, they subtract, then figure out which one's got to be bigger. Okay, let's try the next one. X and x, they got to multiply to 12. 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. This time, when you subtract them, they subtract and get what? 1. Which ones are 1 different? 4 and 3. Okay? Since it's negative, one's got to be negative, one's got to be positive. If we want a positive one, which one's got to be positive? The bigger or the smaller one? Well, if the smallest one's positive, and then if we go positive 3 minus 4, because almost everybody, you may have changed, but almost everybody said, which one's got to be positive? You said the smaller one. 3 minus 4 is going to be negative 1. Is that what we want in the middle? So what do we got to go? Minus 3 plus 4. Because x times that, 4x minus 3x, we get, okay. All right, next one. Pretty good here. Just getting a little more room. X and x, we got to get 16. 1 times 16, 2 times 8, 4 times 4. We can stop because if we get the same number, not going to get more. These now have to again add to negative 10. Which do add up to 10? To an 8. Now, one of the rules, if the last number is negative, you got one positive, one negative. If the last number is positive, they're the same. So to get it to negative 10, they're both going to have to be negative. Because that's negative 8x, and negative 2x makes negative 10x. All right, try the next one. Are they going to have to add or subtract on this one? Subtract. So see if you can do this one. A lot of ways to get 36. When you subtract them, you get 9. Which ones subtract to 9? 3 and 12. So one's got to be 3, one's got to be 12. It's just figuring out which one's positive, which one's negative. In order to have more positives, the bigger one's going to have to be positive and the other one negative. That'll get us 12x when we multiply here, minus 3x, and that is 9x.